The response to the podcast lately has been incredible. It's been insane. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for, I mean, like the podcast is averaging like 10,000 listens an episode.
Yeah. Which brings me to my point. Thank you. Yes, thank you. But unless your thumbs are broken, leave a review. I mean, come on. Is it really that hard? You like this podcast? It's not like you're paying for it.
It's true.
All it takes is a couple, and you're done. That's it. That's all we ask. Rating and a review, especially if you're on Apple. Thank you.
Yes, please. So if you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave a little review. YouTube version, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. And if you really enjoy the podcast, there's a Patreon page to support the podcast. It's a free podcast, so you don't have to. But if you feel so inclined, we would love to have you as a part of the Patreon page. But the Ian White episode. I'm curious because obviously you weren't on the episode, Dave. What did you make?
No,
of it?
I wasn't. I watched it though, and keep in mind, I've got I've known Ian White for a long time. My wife and his ex-wife were actually friends once upon a time, so I've got a few different connections to Ian White, and always been a good guy. Never been a bad guy to me. It was a lot of the stories that he told I was familiar with, but to hear it from the horse's mouth, not calling Ian White a horse, although he was a workhorse, it was just very open and honest. So if you haven't checked out that episode yet, I implore you to go back and have a listen to it.
Well, another thing worth mentioning too. So apparently there was like a W5 or an F5 documentary by TSN on his family and I guess chronicling like his addictions and his arrest and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't find out about it until maybe 2 weeks ago, like a day or two after the podcast went live. And I'm almost kind of glad that I didn't listen to it because I listened to the 15-minute little short film and it kind of made me mad because it was so one-sided towards the one side of the story. And I just thought why isn't Ian a part of the documentary about Ian White? Why isn't Ian's family a part of it about Ian White? So I'm glad that Whitey was nice enough to trust me to share that conversation with the world and his struggles and his adversity coming from the top of the hockey mountain with the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Detroit Red Wings to the Fedzino. Overcoming addiction, arrests, all that kind of stuff. I wish that, I know Dave and I are on the exact same page on this, but I wish the mainstream media would give him a chance on that kind of stuff and not try to sandbag the guy. I think he's a great guy. I've had the privilege of sitting beside him in a locker room for, well, not anymore because I'm done for the season with a hip injury, but for the 2 months that I sat beside him in the locker room, the amount of conversations we shared that I really enjoyed, a great human being, always there to help you if you ever need anything. And on top of that too, I was kind of surprised because I got a lot of messages from guys on the team after the episode went up saying, I've never heard Whitey talk about this stuff. And I'm like, am I the only one who talks to him? Am I the only one where he tells this kind of stuff too? I'm like,
well, you got to keep in mind, he's a little intimidating, right? This is a guy that played over 500 games in the NHL. He played with Nick Lidstrom. How do you talk to a guy like that if you're a guy who's kind of oh, I'm playing professional hockey for the first time. Oh my God, there's Ian White. Oh, where do I look? Oh boy. You know what I mean? It's tough. He's an intimidating guy. No. Regardless of what industry you're in, whether it be sales, whether it be entertainment, when you have somebody like that, how do you relate to that person? You don't have the same experience. You don't have the same tenure. It's intimidating, regardless of who you are.
I think the icebreaker that I had when him and I had first met, had a conversation, he brought his stuff in. He still had a Detroit Red Wings bag. He sits in the room, sits beside me, and he looks at me. And I guess a lot of the guys hadn't introduced themselves yet. And instead of, hey, Travis Ridgen, nice to meet you, looking forward to playing with you, I shook his hand, I looked him in the eye, and I think the first thing I said to him was, did you hear about the new mayor we have in town? And he says, what do you mean? I said, well, Winnipeg, we just got a new mayor. Didn't you hear about that? And then started a whole conversation down a whole rabbit hole, and that's kind of how we started, I guess, building that friendship.
Well, it's funny, just to give you an indication of why that was probably the best approach. I've had the honor and pleasure of meeting Dave Grohl, who is, I know, the drummer of your favorite band, Nirvana, and the frontman of my favorite band, the Foo Fighters. He and I got a chance to meet. The first time I met him, I didn't interview him. I was actually just part of a media kind of meet and greet at MTS Center, which was named at the time in downtown Winnipeg. And I had this vinyl of In Your Honor, which had just been released. I had this vinyl that I wanted him to sign. And I had all these questions. I'm like, okay, just pick one question. Just pick one question. Just one question. Just pick one question and make sure it's good. And when he came up, everything went away. And I noticed that he had gotten his tattoos filled in. And I was a fan of tattoos at the time. And I said, holy shit, you got your tattoos filled in. And he says, yeah, you have no idea how poorly red ink reacts to the skin. And then we got into just a regular human being conversation about two guys who really enjoy tattoos. And my question was gone, and I walked away. He shook my hand. He's like, hey, man, really good talking to you. And the next time we met, he goes, you're the tattoo guy. And so, again, instead of being like, hey, I got a fangirl question for you, Dave Grohl. When you play your Gibson and compared to your old I mean, it didn't matter. It was just one of those like, hey, did you hear we have a new mayor? And it's like, oh, you've disarmed me a little bit. I don't have to be that guy that has to tell you about my 500 career games in the NHL. It was just, here's something we have in common.
I don't think I cared about that, to be honest with you. Like 500 games, like an NHL. Like I remember watching him on Hockey Night in Canada when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, and I thought it was cool, like seeing that then to now. Like I sit beside the guy in the locker room, but I think I just looked at it like he's from Winnipeg. I'm from Winnipeg. At the time of recording the podcast, I thought we were both cancers. Turned out I didn't do my research, and he was a Gemini, but that's beside the point. Goes to show you how much research I do before we record. But shared lots of conversations, and the thing too that I found was that I'd say 3/4 of all the things that he shared on the podcast episode, I'd already heard before. He told me in the locker room, at coffee, at team lunch. I've heard all these stories before, but they're probably just as well spoken, if not better, on the podcast version. I think he primed himself up a little bit before we started going. But when we met up that night, he says to me, he's like, I'm going to need about 40 minutes to explain the meat and potatoes of it. And I said, really? He's like, oh, yeah, trust me. I got this dialed in. Like, he was ready to roll. He was dialed, and it was a fun story to share with him.
Yeah, no kidding. I wish more players, regardless of what league they were playing in, would be more open and honest with their trials and tribulations that they deal with off the ice, because more often than not, more guys do.
Well, like you said a couple episodes ago, more money, more problems, right?
Exactly. It's a problem I'd like to try.
When you have more money, you get a pair of Sheath underwear, which brings us to our amazing presenting sponsor, the folks at sheathunderwear.com, and we'll tell you about it. So, hey, if you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button. We do a new podcast every single Sunday during the season called Sling the Biscuit. It is a non-mainstream hockey podcast, so we talk about my hockey career, the minor pros, Spain, the Fed, you name it, all the stuff that you won't hear in the mainstream news.
Music,
pop culture,
politics, a little bit.
Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you soon.